Welcome back to Beyond Red and Blue's Crucial Case Law series. This week, by popular request, we got Kansas v. Glover.
All right, so Kansas v. Glover, a case decided recently here in 2020 where a patrol officer in the state of Kansas ran a registration check on a pickup truck. The registration came back to a Charles Glover Jr., who had a license status of revoked. The police officer acted on suspicion that the person was operating a vehicle with a suspended or revoked license and stopped the truck without any other suspicion. The officer confirmed that Glover was the driver and issued him a citation for the habitual violator of Kansas traffic laws. A firearm was located when the vehicle was towed, and Glover later moved to suppress the evidence from the stop, arguing that the stop violated the Fourth Amendment. The initial state trial court concluded that it is not reasonable for an officer to infer that the registered owner of a vehicle is also the driver, and granted Glover's motion to suppress the evidence. However, the appellate court reversed it, saying that the inference impermissibly stacked assumptions and it would relieve the state of its burden of showing reasonable suspicion for a stop, meaning the grounds for the stop were satisfied. So it gets sent up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides in a majority decision of 8-1 that whenever a police officer has reasonable suspicion that the driver of the vehicle is likely the registered owner, meaning a fair inference. So if they have anything to the contrary, meaning if they see somebody who is a John Doe, male, white, 60 years old. However, in the driver's seat, there's a 20-year-old female, and they see this prior to the stop is most likely not going to stand. So as long as it's a fair assumption and the inference is reasonable, then they can conduct that investigative stop of the vehicle to determine the license status of the driver. The Supreme Court wrote that they must permit officers to use common sense to make judgments and inferences about human behavior. In this case, it is a common sense inference that the registered owner of the vehicle is likely the driver as well. However, what happens when you make the stop, you go up to the window, you identify the person, and that person is not the driver of the vehicle? The courts have also ruled that the legality of the stop ends after the inquiry of the driver. So if you approach the vehicle and it's not John Doe, that male white, 60 years old driving the vehicle, the basis for the stop is concluded and the stop is complete. So all states have adopted this recent Kansas v. Glover decision. However, Ohio v. Dunlap took it one step further. So Ohio v. Dunlap is a case from 2024. So far, it's decided by Ohio Supreme Court, only applies in the state of Ohio. This case involves very similar circumstances where the driver was stopped for a unlicensed driver inquiry. A firearm was located and it was moved to suppress. It goes up to the Ohio State Supreme Court and they decide 5-2, even though the initial stop was just to inquire about the driver's license status of the registered owner. In this case, the driver was not the registered owner, but they still determined that it is reasonable for an officer to still check the license status of the driver. And they quoted, "The tolerable duration of police inquiries in the traffic stop context is determined by the seizure's mission to address the traffic violation that warranted the stop and to attend related safety concerns. Typically, these inquiries involve checking the driver's license, determining whether there are outstanding warrants against the driver, and inspecting the automobile's registration and proof of insurance. This allows police officers to measurably extend the duration of the stop to identify the driver, even if it isn't the reason why they stopped the person."
So imagine this. You're driving your mom's car late at night in a rural area. She has a revoked license, but you do not. Cop runs the plate, sees your mom's the owner, and pulls you over, suspicious that your mom may be the driver. Is the stop legal, just the stop, even though you personally did nothing wrong?